share, invite your friends and family onto the program so that they don't miss a minute, and prayerfully invite them on so that God can captivate their attention. And through this subject of anatomy, through this wedge of health, that the Savior, that Jesus Christ, might gain access into their hearts. So please lend us your attention, lend Christ your attention, and we are going to have Dr. Ben Scott on the floor. And please take it away, Dr. Ben.
Well, good evening. Glad to have you here. We're going to be talking about the ear in many different ways. So appreciate the opportunity to share the word here. Let's see if we can share our screen here. Yes, indeed. We look at little slideshow here. All right, very good. So Deuteronomy 32:1 says, "Give ear, O ye heavens." So that means there's other persons that have ears besides us. Yes, indeed. In fact, there's ears throughout the universe, because here is not saying good, give ear, O earth. It says, good, give ear, O ye heavens, and I will speak. And hear, O earth. So therefore, the heavens then are responding in a similar fashion that we are responding. So therefore, like us, the heavens also have similar advice and similar ways of learning. Give ear, O ye heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Well, Psalms 139:14, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Fearfully and wonderfully made. Fearfully means that as we study anatomy, therefore we learn to respect, honor God, and give him as the creator. And wonderfully, then we marvel at how he does things and how he compacts things. We look at his wisdom through the process by which these things are being done. So praise thee, for I am wonderfully, fearfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. So therefore, these things have an effect on our soul salvation. They have an effect on our relationship with God as we study what he has done. Well, the ear, 118 times the word ear applies in Scripture. 118 times ear is found in Scripture. So therefore, it's obviously something we need to be aware of. That is an important, and also then other references to ear are even far more than that we find that has to do with. So the ear is very close to our head. And there's a lesson in that. The ear is very close to our brains, very close to our heads. And it is important for wondering. Well, hear must be spelled with ear. If you spell the word here, then you find the largest word in here is ear. And also you find to spell heart, ear is in the center of heart. And if you take both the ears and put them together, you have something that looks like a heart. So when the two ears are put side to side, it gives you the shape of a heart. And we know that the middle of heart has something to do with hearing. In fact, yes, indeed, another way to get somebody's attention is to listen to them. And that also goes with our Father in heaven as well. because if we tremble at his word, then that means we are listening to what he says. And therefore, that is a way to get to the Father's heart, God, Father in heaven, by listening to what he has to say. Well, we look at the amazing ear facts. Well, there's 206 bones in the adult skeleton, 206 bones in adult skeleton. And of those, 8 involve the ear. 8 bones involve the ear. There is 3 little bones on either side, and then either bone is framed by a very large bone called the temporal bone. So therefore, 8 bones involved are significant to our hearing and to the ear and its function. The functions of the ear are dynamic. We have 3-dimensional balance that's associated with. We obviously have hearing, and also the taste. Amazing. What in the world does taste have to do with hearing? And then also we can identify dynamic body position, dynamic body position. Well, normally the ear is always awake. The ear is always awake. The ear never sleeps. Normally, not unless it's under drug inducement. Otherwise, the ear is always open. The ear is always awake. Amazing. And then the little eardrum of our ear that picks up the sound, a baby's eardrums are the same size as adults. Babies' eardrums are the same size as adults. You wouldn't think that. You wouldn't. That would not be something you would be intuitively would put together. And also there's rocks in our ears. That's right. There are rocks or little stones that are in our ears. When somebody say you got rocks in your head, well, that is true. God made it so. We do have rocks in our heads, and they're found in our ears, and they're necessary for the appropriate function of one of the mechanisms of the ear. And also the ear is a mechanical receptor. It is a mechanical receptor. Yes, it does later involve chemical and electrical issues, but is basically a mechanical receptor. So therefore, that means that we do not hear with our ears. The sound is only received by our ears, and then it is our brain that is where the hearing truly takes place, where the sound is appreciated, and then also we'll see where the sound is interpreted in our ear. So it's a interesting concept. 8 bones. Now we're just not going over this just for relaxation. There's going to be a quiz. There's going to be a couple quizzes that's going to show up later. So if you happen to have pen and paper, you may want to write some of these little details down, or if you have excellent hearing and memory, then you may not need to do so. So the ear functions in 3-dimensional balance, static balance, hearing, dynamic balance. Actually, that taste is supposed to be static balance, not taste. Normally, the ear never sleeps unless it's drug induced. Eardrums of babies and adults are the same size. We have rocks in our heads where they're found in our ears. And the ear is a mechanical receptor. And where does our hearing take place? It takes place at the brain level. What will you liken the ear? Well, parts of the ear are found other places. Parts of the ear are found other places. We have something that looks like a mollusk in our ear. That would be a snail. A musical instrument in our ear, drum. We have 2 tools that are reflected in our ears. a hammer and an anvil. We have a tunnel, two tunnels in our ear. And part of our ear has something that looks like part of a saddle that you would ride on a horse. We have antenna. And also we have a transducer that changes something from one form into another form. And we also got two windows in our ear. Amazing. All these things that we find in the human ear. 1 Samuel 9:15, now the Lord had told Samuel in his ear. Wow. Then he had to be very close to Samuel to tell him something in his ear. Amazing, amazing. Well, let's sort of look at the external part of the ear that we call the auricle. That is sort of really is like an antenna. It picks up the sound. That is the auricle. So the auricle is this large structure. The whole outside we call they call it the pinna or the ear. That is the ear itself, or something we call it our ear. Well, then the term is auricle. And it's got some curves on it. This outer curve is called the helix. That's the outer curve. And then inside is a smaller curve called the anti-helix. And just in front, as you come in from your face back, there is a little irregular, sort of firm, triangular structure called the tragus. Opposite to it is the antitragus. Tragus, antitragus. Okay, we have the helix, antihelix. The outer curve is the helix, the inner curve, the antihelix. And then there's sort of a cavity, a depression that is found here. And it is divided into two parts. That part just before it goes into the ear canal, that's called the cava or the cavity there. And then up above, we have the cymba. Both of these together are in that general depression. It's called the concha or conchi, which conchi would be plural, concha is singular. So this is called the cymba up here and the cavity down below, and they all part of the concha. And they're all found within the auricle, which acts as the antenna to catch the sounds and funnel those sounds, catches the sounds and funnel those sounds toward the ear canal that will take that sound inside. Okay. Is your ear attached to your face? It all depends. You say, of course not. Well, that's not true. It all depends. That's based on where your earlobe is. If your earlobe is free, as such as mine is, then it's not attached to my face. Sometimes it's partially attached, as we see here in this little blue arrow. So it's free here, partially attached here, and then it here is attached to the face. So the earlobe is completely attached to the face. So there is that here is it attached, here it is free from the face. Here is sort of a in-between situation. All right, so let's look inside. When the Lord spoke to Samuel in his ear, then he was very close to him and wanted that information to go directly inside. Well, we look at the ear as in three different areas. It's an outer ear. This is where the pinna or the auricle is on the outside. That's the outer ear. And it has a channel that comes from that cavity inward. This is called the external auditory meatus or the ear canal, common language. And it ends at the eardrum. And this is where the sound causes vibration of that eardrum. Piece of actually looks like skin, very thin skin, stretched across that inside of the canal. And that's the end of the external or the outer ear. That's called a tympanic Like you heard in concerts, they have a timpani drum, timpani, and that's the type of drum, the tympanic drum. And then there's the middle ear, which contains the 3 bones, one of those 3 of that 8 that we talked about. And then there's the inner ear, which contains the organ for hearing, and it contains the organs for balance. And here we find our windows. Okay. So the outer ear, the temporal bone, houses the outer ear, and also the structures that hold the ear in totality is the temporal bone. Inside of the middle ear, the 3 little bones, and we have a malleus, an incus, and a stapes. The malleus, common word, hammer. Incus, common word, anvil. And the stapes is the horseshoe. And the horseshoe is attached to the oval window. Horseshoe is attached to the oval window. This particular diagram is not correct here. It is attached to the oval window. And then this should be round window. The round window, there's nothing attached to the round window. And then there's 3 semicircular canals, look like hoops inside. These semicircular canals are very important for balance, dynamic balance, 2 kinds of balance. The vestibule like an entrance to into a room or narthex. The vestibule, that is going to be for static balance, identifying if you're standing still and what position your head is the vestibule. Semicircular canals deal with our movement in space. Our movement in space is the semicircular canals. And then the cochlea, that is the mollusk. That's what looks like a snail. That is the cochlea, and that is the transducer inside, and one of the canals inside of it. There's 3 canals inside, and it transduces or changes sound to electrical energy, and then that is picked up by the nerve for hearing. There's two, actually the hearing nerve, cranial nerve number 8, is 2 parts. It has a vestibular, which is balance, and has a cochlear, which is hearing. So actually the 8th cranial nerve has to do with hearing and balance. The vestibular portion deals with balance. The cochlear portion deals with hearing. Okay. All right. So let's go and review some things. We're gonna got a quiz coming up here. So we know the outer part is called the helix, and then that's the outer curve. The inner curve is called the antihelix. We have the little tragus, sort of like a little protection to the anterior ear canal. That's called the tragus. Opposite is going to be the antitragus. Then we have the cavum here. Then we have the cavity. That is the cymba above, and down below is the cavity. That is found there in called the concha. Okay. And different parts of the ear we say are found in other places. We have a mollusk. So we talked about the snail. That snail is a mollusk. Musical instrument. We talked about the tympanic drum. 2 tools. We have a tunnel. That's the ear external canal that brings the sound to the middle ear. Part of a saddle as part of one of those little bones. The antenna, that is what the big auricle, the ear, what we normally call our ear, that is what picks up that sound. The transducer, that is what changes sound to electrical signals and then transmitted to the brain. And there's 2 windows. One of those windows is attached to a little bone, and the other window doesn't have any attachments to it. Okay. All right, is your ear attached to your face? Well, look at your earlobe. If it's free, no. It may be partially attached here, or it may be completely attached right here, okay? All right, so let's go to a little quiz here. Let's go to a little quiz so we can have some response here. And we're just going to look at where the numbers are. We look at the number 1, number 3, number 2, and number 4. What do we call number 1? What do we call number 1?
The helix.
If they may answer this.
The helix.
Unmute. Anybody can unmute and say what number 1 is?
The helix.
Someone's responding.
Anyone? What about number 2? What about number 2? Just in front of your ear canal. What about number 2?
The tragus. Or
What do we-
tragus.
Tragus. That's right. That's right. That's right. What about number 3? Number 3.
The antitragus.
That's right. Antitragus. That's correct. That's correct. What about number 4? That little area right there.
Tunnel.
Right. It's a little cavity just before. That's the cavity just before the eardrum for sure. So yeah, they're not quite the tunnel. It's just anterior to it, just anterior to the outside. All right. And number 1, what was number 1? Did we say what that was? It starts with the letter H. Helix. That's correct. That's right. Very good. Very good. All right. Okay. Well, good. We're catching. We're picking up things. So let's go the inside of the ear. Now we're going to look at a little quiz for the inside of the ear. Okay. Number 2 here. What is number 2?
The tunnel.
Right. That's the auditory canal. That carries sound into it here. What about number 3? What instrument is that?
The drum.
That's right. Tympanic growth. We're only getting 1 responder here. Anyone else that's picking up this information? Very good. All right. And number 6. What is number 6? Is right here. This has a little loop in it. What is number 6? It's similar to something on a saddle. Stirrup, the stapes. Indeed. All right, so those little bones are in which part of the ear? We have outer, middle, or inner. Which part of those little bones are located?
Middle.
Right, that'll be the middle ear. And then we have this little curlicue structure. That is the mollusk, and what is that called?
The cochlea.
Cochlea, that's correct. And its function is?
Hearing.
Right, to change, right, sound into electrical signals. That's true. All right, and then we didn't mention it before, number 7 is a tube that goes from the middle ear to the throat. If you've ever been on a plane or climbed up a mountain, you start feeling pressure in your ear. Well, that tube is called the eustachian tube, and it equalizes the air pressure in your middle ear to the air pressure in the atmosphere around you. And by chewing or swallowing, then you relieve that pressure in your ear, and therefore it equalizes the pressure senses. All right, well, very good, very good. Okay, let's see what else we can find. Well, the blood supply to the ear is rich. Here we have the external carotid artery. Now, the off of the main artery that comes out of the heart, called the aorta, it branches into 2, an internal carotid and an external carotid. The internal carotid goes to the brain. The external carotid goes to other areas of the face, right? So here, almost very direct blood supply from the major artery off the heart is the external carotid. And it provides the blood supply to the, that's why when you get an ear cut, your ear bleeds profusely because it has a huge amount of blood supply to it. And so that is the ear. And this is, most of the ear is cartilage. Most of the ear is cartilage. So this blood supply really is to the skin areas because cartilage does not have blood supply. Let me repeat that. Cartilage does not have blood supply. It is what we call avascular, or without blood supply. So that's why when a person, when they're working in the ER, some guy's been fighting and they come in and guy got his ear bit, somebody bit his ear. That's a horrible, horrible infection because cartilage doesn't have blood supply and is difficult to fight infections because it doesn't have blood supply that carries the things necessary for fighting infection. So therefore, those bites or injuries that pierce the cartilage end up having terrible infections. The only way you can get medicine or things to it is from the outside, not from the inside. So this blood supplies to the skin areas around the ear, but the cartilage itself is avascular or without blood supply. All right, looking at the hearing pathways, So here we see this little snail structure. We know that's the one on either side. That's the cochlea. That's what transduces or changes the sound into electrical signals. And it comes and goes and will go, whatever you hear in your left ear will go to both sides of the brain. It's going to go to the same side brain and will also go to the opposite side brain. Why would that happen? Why would the Lord do that? Well, if you ever sort of watched animals like a horse, and it has two ears up there, and it will turn its ears to where the sound is coming from. Well, since we can't turn our earlobes to where the sound, we turn our head. And by adjusting our head so that the sound entering our right ear equals the sound entering our left ear, then we know that's the direction that the sound is coming from. So therefore, by allowing the sound to go to both ears, it allows us to give direction to where the sound is coming from. We turn our head to get the best input for sound. So sound from the left ear, does it go to the right side of the brain? Yes, it goes to both sides of the brain, which gives us ear direction. And that sound goes to what part of the brain is on the temporal lobe called the primary auditory cortex. And here we see that the temporal lobe looks like a thumb shape on the side of the brain, and that is the auditory cortex. Now that we're going to go a little bit more deep to that as to what the function of the cortex is different than something else. So the auditory cortex, primary auditory cortex, receives the uninterpreted sound. The auditory cortex receives the uninterpreted sound, okay? So it's the raw data goes to that part of the brain. That is called the temporal lobe. Okay, so the left temporal lobe is going to receive information from both ears. The right temporal lobe is going to receive information from both ears, right? So that's why we see it crosses, the sound crosses from one side as to the other. So both sides receive that information. All right, now let's go a little bit deeper here. So here we're looking at the side of a temporal lobe, and we see the word says hearing, and it says auditory association area. Okay, what is the difference between the hearing, that's the primary auditory cortex, and auditory association area? Well, hearing in this area, the primary cortex, is the uninterpreted sound. Auditory association area identifies that sound. Oh, that's my dad speaking, or that is a dog barking, or that's a cat, or that's a horse, or that's a siren. Association area identifies the sound. Hearing is the reception of the raw, unidentified stimulus. Okay, so hearing, both are on the temporal lobe. Hearing cortex receives, auditory association interprets. All right. So here we got, so therefore now we're looking at still look a little smaller view of that same hearing and auditory association area. And then when we look inside, we see that these numbers here, and these numbers are that which corresponds to that little snail structure. Let's go back and look at that little snail structure. And here we're looking at number 10. And number 10 is the tip of the snail, where the stapes attached is going to be the base of the snail. And the sounds received closer to this little stirrup are collected in a different place than sounds that are collected or that are identified from the tip of the snail. So the base of the snail to the tip of the snail. What's the difference? Those sounds that's near the stapes are low sounds like thunder, the rolling of thunder. So the bass sounds are closer to, excuse me, not the bass sounds, the high-pitched sounds like a squeal or shriek are near the stapes, that's the bass. The apex is the rolling thunder, the real low sounds. So number 10 is where the apex of the snail, that is those sounds that are like a deep bass sound, whereas around the oval window, it's going to be high-pitched sounds, those real squeaky sounds, like you screech your finger across a chalkboard or something like that, that squeal, that is picked up there. So therefore, when God has defined certain areas of the brain that picks up those sounds, okay? So here we see those sounds that are low sounds, and those sounds that at the base are going to be the very high-pitched sounds. Okay? All right, the transducer. How does it happen? Well, we see the auricle, which is the outside or the pin of the ear. Sound enters the external auditory canal, vibrates on this stretch of skin called the tympanic membrane. It moves one bone called the malleus, that moves the second bone called the incus, and the third bone called the stapes attached to the oval window. All right, so what's the order then? It's malleus first, incus second, S third, M-I-S, miss. Malleus, incus, stapes. That's the order by which the vibrations occur. The malleus is attached to the tympanic membrane. It is attached to the incus. The incus, therefore, is attached to the stapes, the horseshoe. And then the horseshoe is attached to the oval window. There are 3 canals within the snail. There's 3 little canals within that snail. We'll see that shortly. And the stape is attached to one of those little canals. And then as it vibrates, in those canals is liquid, and it will stimulate a nerve. And then that, where it stimulates, that will be picked up and carried by the cochlear nerve. If it's a sound near the tip of the snail, then that's going to be low sounds transmitted on the cochlear nerve. The sounds near the stapes, that's going to be high-pitched sounds going to be transmitted to the brain, okay? External auditory canal, tympanic membrane, malleus attached to the membrane, moves the middle bone called the incus. The middle bone moves the inner bone called the stapes. And stapes moves at the oval window, moves the liquid, and as it moves the liquid, depends on what sound it is, that will be carried by the cochlear nerve, which is the sound portion of the 8th cranial nerve. Vestibular deals with balance. We haven't got to that at this point. All right. So this is maybe a little more simplified, looking at the path of the cochlea of the snail, the mollusk, eardrum, ear canal, eardrum, malleus, incus, and stapes. It moves on where the oval window moves the liquid inside, and then that is transmitted to the brain. Okay, so it's 3 little canals inside of the snail. We'll see that in just a little bit. All right. So remember the 3 little bones. Now it's time for a little quiz. Now it's time for a little quiz. All right, which one of these are not a bone in the ear? Which one of these is not a bone in the ear?
Cochlea.
That's right, the cochlea. That's right. And which is the middle bone in the ear? Which is the middle bone in the
Anvil.
ear?
Anvil.
That's right, anvil, anvil. Any adults out there? No one else brave enough to address these things? All right. Okay, what is the snail-shaped spirally wound tube in the inner ear that contains hearing sensitive receptor cells?
The cochlea.
Cochlea, that's right. That is the cochlea, yes indeed. All right, very good. We just did we store anything? Did we store what we want to put together here? Rena, be sure to keep my time here. So I don't know what my time is like. So just let me know if I
You're
pull my
okay.
little coattail.
You're okay. You have time.
All right, he that hath an ear, let him what?
Ear.
He that hath an ear, let him hear. And we see this individual needs some assistance in hearing. In fact, there's many things we do need assistance in hearing, with or without a appliance, okay? There's things we need. The Holy Spirit allows us, teaches us, trains us to hear the still small voice. The still small voice. In fact, if we're accustomed to hearing a lot of loud sounds, we lose the ability to hear the soft sounds, okay? In fact, if you have somebody wearing earbuds listening to music, parents, if you have some of your children listening to music, and you can hear the music, they got earbuds in their ear, and you can hear the music standing beside them, that sound is too loud. And that sound is causing injury to the very sensitive hair cells in their ear. And there, over a period of time, that person will become insensitive to those sounds. So if they got an earbud and you hear that sound standing next to them, then that sound is too loud and is injuring that person's ear. Just like somebody who's been working in loud industrial areas, loud noises, constant sounding, loud, high-pitched sounds of machinery without ear protection, then they will lose the ability to hear those sounds over time. So we want to protect that which God has given us. He that hath an ear, let him hear, but you want to be able to always hear the still small voice of the Holy Spirit. All right, so let's look at this little organ called the cochlea, And we have 3 canals, we call them scala. 3 canals we call scala. As we look at it, we got an upper canal, a middle canal, and a lower canal. The top canal is called a scala vestibuli. The middle canal is called as M for middle, M for media, scala media. And the bottom canal is called a scala tympani, okay? Scala vestibuli, media, and tympani, all right? Scala vestibuli is attached to the oval window, all right? And they all go out and meet at the tip of the snail. And then the scala tympani is attached to the round window, all right? So scala vestibuli, oval window where the little stapes, the stapes is, round window is scala tympani. There's nothing attached to the round window. So those are the two windows that are in the ear. The scala media, it is that area, that's where the transducer, that's where the vibrations in the liquid, which are in all the canals, is liquid in the top, middle, and bottom canal. The vibrations that are in that top canal are transmitted through the media, and then it picks up that vibration and then sends it to the brain, and therefore it is interpreted, okay? The scala tympani is sort of a dampening canal, and therefore after that vibration comes out. So that is the cochlea and the sound, scala vestibuli, scala media, and scala tympani. Well, see if we take another look at it. So here's the snail, okay, the cochlea. Auditory nerve, we know that's the 8th cranial nerve. We know there's 3 canals. We've got the tympani, vestibuli, and media. And now we're going to take a little closer look at the middle canal, because that's where the sound really is the vibration is turned into electrical signals, okay? So there's liquid that's found in the scala media, okay? Now we've heard about ions, sodium ions, magnesium ions, phosphorus ions, potassium ions. We know they're very important. In fact, when you go to the doctor and he tests your chemistry, he tests to see what your ion count is in your body, how much sodium, potassium, etc. The ion of hearing is potassium. The ion of hearing is potassium. The middle canal has a higher concentration of potassium than the other 2 canals. And potassium is very important in terms of hearing. So the ion of hearing is potassium, okay? It's short is like a letter K, all right? So we have a membrane called a tectoral membrane and a bottom membrane upon which what we call the hearing organ sits on. And there's little tiny hairs that when the liquid is vibrated, moves this membrane resting on these little hairs. The first row of hairs, and then there's a second row of hairs. First row is a single row. Second row is 3 different rows. The inner row picks up most of hearing. The inner hair cell row picks up most of hearing. The outer hair cells really modify the sound to enhance its texture or quality, okay? So most of our hearing is picked up by the inner hair cell row. The outer hair cell is just for modification or increasing the texture or the quality of sound. And then those signals are transferred by the cochlear nerve to the brain, or the number 8 cranial nerve. So that's where it's transducing. This is where the sound waves are converted to electrical impulses through little hair cells. This membrane, as the liquid vibrates, moves this membrane over these hair cells, and then it moves those hair cells, and that creates a stimulus in the nerve, and that is taken to the brain. I think we got a little bigger picture here. So scala vestibuli on top, scala tympani on below, scala media in the middle, and this area where the sound is picked up is called the organ of Corti, or the hearing organ. The first row of hair cells, the inner row, most of the hearing, 90% of hearing is picked up. The outer hair cell row, 3 rows, this is where sound is modified. Sound is modified. So we got scala vestibuli, media, and tympani. Which of these has the higher potassium ratio? Scala vestibuli, scala media. That's right. Scala media is highly concentrated in potassium, different than the others, and potassium is used in our hearing. Potassium is key to be used in our hearing. Okay. Well, let's look a little closer to since we have hearing, then God has also given us ways to protect our ears. And our sound protection is called the attenuation reflex. So not only does the Lord want us to hear, but he also wants us to be protected against unwanted sounds. Amazing. He wants us to hear, but he also wants to protect us from unwanted sounds. So the attenuation reflex is a sound protection mechanism in the middle ear. And to these little bones, there are muscles attached. And those muscles are stimulated when we have continuous loud sounds. And it will reduce the vibration of these little bones. When that muscle contracts, it reduces the vibration and therefore protects the hearing mechanism. So when these little muscles are stretched, are contracting, it reduces the vibration speed, therefore reduces the sound being transmitted. So amazing, the attenuation reflex that God has given us to protect us from unwanted sounds, Okay. All right, now let's look at some terms about sound. If we're talking about sound, then we need to understand what terms are related to sounds. What terms are related? Well, we have two terms. We've got amplitude and we have hertz or pitch. Amplitude is associated with volume. Hertz is associated with pitch. Okay. Amplitude is like when you turn the volume up on your radio. When you make it louder, that is amplitude. Okay. And amplitude is measured in decibels. So that's sound energy. Amplitude is sound energy. All right. So here we see like the short little waves to the taller waves. Well, this is something very high volume. You want to turn that down. This is low volume. Okay. So amplitude measures sound energy. Hertz measures pitch. So that's mean it's something that's a high pitch sound or low pitch sound. So low pitch sounds have a longer wave. But we go from this line to this line. That's obviously more distance between these two lines as compared over here, whereas there's a short distance. So this would be like a soprano voice. Lower pitch would be like a bass voice. So hertz measures pitch. We're talking about thunder sound, or you're talking about a tiny squeaky sound. Okay, that's hertz. Hertz is not sound energy. Hertz is pitch. Amplitude is energy, volume, and that's measured in decibels. Decibels is the word. Okay. So wavelength is associated with hertz. Height of a wave associated with amplitude or volume. Okay. All right. Well, there are ways to test our hearing. There's ways for us to test our hearing. How do we know if there's a nerve problem to the ear, or if there's something in the ear blocking the sound getting to the tympanic membrane. Well, there are two tests that deal with this. One is called the Rene test. The other is called the Weber test. Okay? And there's two types of conduction. There's sound conduction. That's the Rene test. And then there's nerve conduction. Right? So for instance, if a person got wax in their ear and it's blocking the ear canal, or sometimes in kids, they get little tiny things and poke in their ear. When they poke in their ear, then it doesn't allow the sound to travel through to the eardrum. Let's go and look back at our so here we see that if we can't get sound to the tympanic membrane, then the tympanic membrane won't vibrate to be able to make that sound to be interpreted. So if we got something in the ear canal, Rene helps evaluate if there's something in the ear canal that could be causing a sound. That is the Rene test. Let's see how it works. What will the doctor or the nurse will take a tuning fork, and they will tap the tuning fork, and then they will put the tuning fork on the bone, the temporal bone behind the ear. And he will ask the person, can you hear this? And they'll say, yes, I hear that. And then the doctor will say, well, tell me when it goes away. And then after a while, the vibration is longer felt. Say, well, I don't hear that anymore. Then they'll take and put the end of the tuning fork near the ear canal and say, do you hear this? You say, yes, I hear that. Well, what does that mean? That means air conduction is better than bone conduction. Okay. So against the bone of the ear, if you hear it, then it goes away, and then you put it next to the ear. Do you hear this? Yes, I hear that. That means air conduction is better than bone conduction, which means normal. Now, if they tap the tuning fork and there's something blocking the ear canal, you put the tuning fork back there and say, do you hear this? Yes, tell me when it goes away. It's gone away. Do you hear this? No, I don't hear that. Well, that means bone conduction is better than air conduction. And when it does that, then that means there's something blocking the sound getting to the tympanic membrane. Okay. So Rene test identifies if there's something blocking the eardrum. Okay. All right. Weber is used to help evaluate nerve conduction problems. And what it'll do, the doctor will tap the tuning fork, put it on the forehead, and then he'll ask, which ear do you hear this best in? You hear it in the left ear or in the right ear? Well, if the person says, well, I hear it both the same, well, that's normal. But if they say, I hear it better in my left ear, then that indication is that ear has the nerve problem, okay? But both the Rene and the Weber test have to be done together to identify that. But the Weber, the ear that you hear it best in is the involved ear, or the ear that has the problem, okay? That is the Weber test. So Weber is the nerve test. Rene is the sound test. Rene is the sound test. Okay. So if you got earwax in your ear, which test will reveal that?
Rene.
Rene, that's right. Rene is a test to reveal the air conduction issue. Weber is the nerve, sensory nerve issue. but they have to be used together to really refine it, to get it down to what it needs to be. Am I okay, Renee? I mean, Renee, Raina.
Okay, we have a few more minutes. You're fine.
Okay. All right. Job said, "Let me be weighed in an even balance, that God may know mine integrity." Interesting. Let me be weighed in an even balance, that God may know mine integrity. The ear is important for our balance mechanism. And we want our balance to be even. If our balance is off, then we end up getting what we oftentimes refer to as motion sickness, motion instabilities, okay? And the ear is part of that process. Balance, the ear? Yes, indeed. The ear has two types of balance that it identifies. Static balance, S for static, S for stationary, position of the head to gravity. That's static balance, or identifying if you're beginning to move, the static balance. Dynamic balance is balance within a three-dimensional space, all right? So there's three planes of the body. Plane that divides the body into left and right side, a plane that divides the body into front and back, and then a plane that divides the body into top and bottom, okay? Those we have sensors that identifies in those three planes. What we call the sagittal plane that divides the body into left and right, coronal plane divides the body into front and back, and then transverse or horizontal plane that divides the body to top and bottom. And in the ear, we have mechanisms to identify those ways. So let's look at dynamic balance. Dynamic balance. Well, here we talked about the cochlea. That is what picks up sound. And we talked about the oval window, but we didn't talk about these three semicircular canals, okay? And the three semicircular canals are the ones that picks up movement in those different planes. We have an anterior one, which is at the top, posterior one here on to the back, and a lateral semicircular canal, which is horizontal. So if you're going to start walking forward, face forward, this canal will pick up that movement. Or you get in a car and start moving, this canal picks up that movement, okay? If you start walking sideways, moving left to right, this posterior canal picks up that movement, okay? The lateral canal, if you start spinning like a ballerina, start turning around in one place, this canal picks up that movement. Anterior, front and back movement, posterior, left to right movement, lateral spinning movement. These are the dynamic balance sensors, receptors that picks up that aspect of our balance, okay? So let's look at it a little better here. So we got three semicircular canals filled with a liquid called endolymph, and also the balance mechanism, this liquid also is high in potassium. So potassium is important for hearing. It is also important for balance, okay? So here's the semicircular canals, and at the base of them, we have these little receptors. The cupula looks like a little flame, sits on the tip of hair cells, and those hair cells are connected to fibers of the vestibular nerve that carries balance to our brain. We expand one of those little hair cells, then we see we got some short ones and long ones attached to a hair cell. And as these little hair cells are tipped or moved by the liquid in the canal, you can imagine that here we have these are standing upright. And when a person moves, the liquid in a canal will tilt that little sensor. And when it tilts that sensor, it stimulates these little hair cells, and they will stimulate this cell, and then it will stimulate the balance nerve. That's the way it moves. By the momentum of the liquid moving against these little sensors in the particular plane of movement identifies to us which way we may be moving. Okay, so we have the anterior, posterior, and lateral, and these are the very unique sensors that are there that are tilted by the momentum of the liquid moving them, stimulating the vestibular nerve, which is the nerve for balance. So the transverse plane or the lateral canal picks up spinning motion. The coronal plane divides the body into front and back, picks up side-to-side motion. And the sagittal plane is the anterior canal, picks up forward and back motion. Okay, so let's translate this. So if a person was doing somersaults, which canal would pick up that movement? If a person was doing somersaults or backflips, which canal would pick up that movement?
Anterior. The one in the bottom.
That's right. It would be sagittal. It would be sagittal plane. So if a person was doing side to side, then that would be which plane?
Coronal plane.
Coronal plane. That's right. That would be coronal plane. Right. And then if a person was spinning, then that would be the lateral canal that would be picking up that motion. And what will be happening is the liquid inside the canal would be moving and tilting this little receptor called the cupula, tilting it. And as it tilts it, it would stimulate the balance nerve. And then that would be interpreted by the brain. Okay. Just a little larger view of the same thing, the little cupula that changes movement of liquid to electrical stimuli in the nerve that we identify as movement. So that was dynamic balance. That's dynamic balance. That balance moving within three planes. So now let's look at static balance. What is static balance? Static balance is balance standing in one place and its position of head to gravity. Okay, let's take a look at that. So if we have the guy on, he's on his little mountain bike and his head is upward. Okay, and inside of what we call the vestibule, there's little hair cells, and here is a jellied mass with little calcium carbonate stones, or what we call otoliths or rocks. So calcium carbonate rocks are in our ears. So if somebody say you got rocks in your head, you must admit you do. We all do. That's what God put there. And as his head is upright, these little calcium stones in that jellied mass pick up the sensation that is upright. When he tilts his head forward, the pull of gravity on that jellied mass with those stones in there stimulates these little hair cells, and therefore we know our head is forward. So that is static balance. Because we have little otoliths, which means little ear stones. That's what oto is ear, lith is stone. So we got ear stones in a little jelly mass sitting on top of hair cells. And inside of that is liquid that has potassium strength in it. And as we move to affect gravity, then that picks up, and therefore we have a position that we know how our head is. So that is static balance found in the vestibule. Dynamic balance is found in the semicircular canals. Okay, still working basically the same way. A liquid moving a sensor hair cells are stimulated and creating a vestibular nerve response. Okay. And here's a little higher view of the same thing. Here is the semicircular canals, 1, 2, and 3. And then at the base of them is the vestibule, sort of like the entrance. And that is where this mechanism is located. Hair cells with a jelly mass with calcium carbonate stones or otoliths or calcium rocks that are sensitive to gravity. And that's where how we pick up static balance or position of head to gravity. And also if we start first to move one way or another, then we got the idea we're starting to move, okay? All right, and how is that transmitted? Well, that's transmitted from one side to the opposite side of the brain. So the vestibule on the left side is going to transmit to the right side. But it also goes through the visual area of our brain as well, okay? So we get ideas about our balance not only by what happened inside of our head, but also by our visual reference to what is around us. And when what we see does not correlate with what is being sensed or sent to the brain, sometimes that can cause us what we call motion sickness. That there's a discoordination between what we are seeing and what we're feeling, and that can cause that sort of problem. But that's the vestibular organ transmit to the opposite side, but it also sends it through the visual area, and therefore there's where it can be a checking of the stimuli with what we feel versus what we see and see if they're the same. So Proverbs 11:1 says, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. And when we get a false balance, our whole system doesn't function. When we get a false balance, that the eyes is not correlating with what the brain is doing, then we get this uneasiness, and it doesn't make us comfortable at all, not at all. All right, UMBK, what does this mean? UMBK means you must be knowing. So it's a quiz. UMBK, you must be knowing, Well, let's look at a couple questions. Inner row hair cells function as, we're talking about the cochlea. The inner row of hair cells function as, what does they function doing? Right, the inner row hair cells picks up most of the hearing. Inner row hair cells picks up the lion's share of our hearing, all right? So we got an inner hair cell row is the main part of hearing. The outer hair cell row is for modification of the sound, okay? Number 31, posterior semicircular canal associates with blank dynamic movement. Posterior semicircular canal associated with blank dynamic movement. So we got an anterior semicircular canal, a lateral, and a posterior. So if you're doing side to side motion, would it be anterior, lateral, or posterior? Anyone? Right, posterior semicircular canal is going to be picking up side to side motion. Side to side motion, right? Cartwheels. If you're doing cartwheels, that's going to be posterior semicircular canal picking up dynamic motion. What is the cupula? Where do we see the word cupula? Cupula. Let's go back and see where we talked about the cupula. There it is. Cupula is at the base of the semicircular canal that picks up the fluid movement in that canal to identify which particular position we may be moving in. Okay, Rene test. What does Rene test measure? Remember, there's two tests, Weber and Rene. Which one you can take care of with a shower? Which one you got to go to the doctor?
So the Rene test is to see if something is blocking the eardrum, and the Weber is to evaluate the nerve condition to see if there is a problem. Absolutely.
That's correct. Yeah, Rene identifies if bone conduction better than air. Air is better, then it's fine. But if bone is better, something's blocking the eardrum, or could be fluid in the middle ear. The vibration is not getting to the oval window. That would be Rene. So that is essentially what that is. Yes. All right. What attaches to the round window? Remember that we got two windows in the ear. What's the other window? Oval window. And there's a horseshoe structure that connects to that called the stapes, right? The stapes, which is the last little bone bringing vibrations to the cochlea, attaches to the oval window. The round window, there's nothing attaches to it. It's a dampening function. All right, 27. Which end of the basilar membrane conducts high-pitched sounds? Remember toward the tip of the snail or toward the oval window of the cell? Which part of that membrane would pick up high-pitched sounds? Out to the tip.
Oval.
That's right. High-pitched sounds at the oval window, and then at the thunder is picked up out at the tip of the basilar membrane. What's the difference between pitch and hertz? What's the difference between pitch and hertz? Let's go back and look at that. What's the difference between pitch and hertz?
One measures decibels, and the other.
That's right, pitch and hertz. Okay, actually, there's no difference. Hertz and pitch is the same thing, okay? So hertz measures pitch. Amplitude measures volume, right? So hertz measures wavelength, low sound versus high sound in terms of pitch, soprano versus bass, that's pitch, all right? Volume is amplitude, that's decibels. So volume is a decibel measurement. Hertz is a wavelength measurement. Sound energy is amplitude or decibels. Wavelength, high or low pitch, because you can have a loud low sound and a soft low sound. You can have a loud high sound and a soft high sound. So hertz measures the pitch, if it's a soprano versus a bass, that sort of thing. Okay. Vestibule is associated with what type of balance? The vestibule is associated with what type of balance? You got two choices, static or dynamic. Vestibule, static or dynamic balance. Well, let's go back and look at here. So if we're looking at this structure here, is this static balance or dynamic balance with the three semicircular canals?
Dynamic.
Right, dynamic. Dynamic is the is the vestibule is associated with static balance, position of gravity of the head. Okay, heart and sound. Well, that's all I have for today on this here. Any questions? Any questions?
I do have a question. If someone is having issues with vertigo, would potassium help?
No, not directly. That would be one of the issues to evaluate their electrolytes. But vertigo requires a significant evaluation to see what type of vertigo that they're having. If it's a nerve issue, if there's an imbalance, if there's anything going on in terms of space occupying lesion, if there's disease, it's quite a little schematic one has to go through to identify. The vertigo is one of the more challenging issues in dealing with in medicine. So it's not that simple at all. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question. If
Go ahead.
the earwax, I'm assuming, is there for preventive purposes. So if you had an ant or a small crawling insect trying to penetrate the earwax would trap the insect. Also, secondary question, how do you know if there's too much earwax in the ear? And how would you clean it?
Well, periodically, the earwax just does help coat the inside of the ear and for the health of the skin inside of it. It's similar to a little sweat gland, but also depending upon the hydration of the individual as to the consistency of the earwax. Periodically, as a person showers, it'd be good to turn their head in such a way to a gentle shower stream and allow that shower to spray into the ear. You can adjust your ears such a way you can feel if the water is going in it or just around it. And then that water will liquefy that earwax, and periodically that will keep that out. Otherwise it becomes very hard and difficult to move. That sometimes it indeed will require a physician or nurse and trained individual to go and remove it actually manually, or sometimes they can do with a syringe with warm water and to remove it. But they have to identify first, is the ear okay? The eardrum is not punctured. There's no other issues going on in there. And then to wash that out. The earwax, usually in terms of insects, the ear is very, very intolerable for insects. It will let you know there's something in that ear. You cannot sit still with any insect in your ear. The nerves are too sensitive to that, unless it is something very, very, very small, at the microscopic level, they will know that. But the earwax is to help protect the ears inside for those sorts of things. But like a little bug or a gnat, you couldn't sit still with something like that in your ear. Your nerves just send too many signals to you to get it out, you see. And the eardrum is very sensitive to anything up against it like that.
Well, how would you get it out?
You'd either if you have somebody that know what they're doing, to wash it out. There's a variety of things. Sometimes they can, if you have to understand what the ear is, sometimes they'll put little oil in it, and that will cause, like some little moths can get in there, and the oil will sort of drown the moths, and then it can be washed out. But as long as it's moving, boy, it is not tolerable at all. You want to get it out as soon as you can. But if it's not something that you're comfortable doing or someone around you, then you need to seek professional care. All these things really just sort of educational. So they giving you but not really medical advice, but these are practical things to do just for your understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Amen. I have a question for you, Doctor.
Sure.
This is Carlos speaking. So this one's more of a, let's see, not sure the word to use, maybe a spiritual question, maybe a little bit philosophical, but I wanted to respond to the individual, but they, I guess they signed off, but they had asked, I guess they were battling within themselves, and they were concerned that a subject such as anatomy was not Sabbath oriented. And I'm reminded of the scripture in Psalm 139, where David said, or where the psalmist says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works
Right.
are wonderful.
Right.
So I personally believe that a subject like this is edifying, but what can you say? What light can you shed on a subject like this and how it can, I'll leave that to you. What could you say on a subject like this in regards to the Sabbath?
Well, if you go and look at study nature and study the flowers and the trees and how things are made, and here's this plant and this is edible plant, a non-edible plant. There's all that is studying the laws of God in nature. Anatomy is also studying the law of God within us. And we're wonderfully and fearfully made. So that means that the study is going to enhance our worship. That's fearfully. Wonderfully going to cause us to advise, to be, to understand the marvels of his wisdom, you see. So we're not studying anatomy as a class in terms of like you're taking a class to do that. We're looking at the connection of the anatomy with the word of God and to enhance our relationship to him. So unless there's a particular theological question, which I don't mind entertaining at any time what that is, to why the study of the pinnacle of God's creation is just as inviting as studying the clouds or the trees or the flowers in nature as well. I don't. Unless there's a particular compelling theological question, I like to see what that is, but it doesn't. From the surface, it doesn't seem to appear that. And as we study to enhance our understanding of what he has done and how he does it and how we take care of ourselves, that we may honor him, it seems appropriate for any day of the week, and particularly Sabbath, to enhance our understanding of the God who has created us on that sixth day.
Amen. Well said. Thank you for shedding some light on that. I believe we have two more hands for you.
Sure.
All right. Go ahead, Janice. You can unmute your mic.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask probably a question you get a lot. I have someone that really needs to have their hearing checked. They get very aggravated saying, why don't you talk louder, that kind of thing. Why is there such a resistance for a person to, who really cannot hear, to go and see about their hearing? Or is it, I'm sure you've dealt with that. What is it that one can do to help?
What age is the person?
75, but it's been having problems since they were about 70 years old, and blames everybody else.
Yeah,
that
would,
talking loud enough.
Yeah, that would require an evaluation, because there's multiple concerns beyond just the ear. There's many things in terms of any kind of systemic medical issues, circulation issues. There's a number of issues, particularly at that age group, that must be considered, that a physician or nurse practitioner would have to look at and go through a detailed history, and medical history, drug history, etc., to narrow the landscape down to what may be involved in the hearing.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for your question, Janice. Thank you for your answer, Doc. Let's have Carolyn with her question.
Oh, hi there. Another question, Doctor. Why is hearing loss cannot be regained?
Hearing loss, why it cannot be gained. Let's show you, go back and give you an idea of that issue.
I think I know, but I want to know for certain.
Are you able to see the slide?
Yes.
These little hair cells, once they're destroyed, they don't come back. And hearing loss, high-pitched sounds will overdrive and destroy those hair cells. And once those hair cells are destroyed, then they don't reproduce. Because the nerve, once that is given to us at birth, and once it's destroyed, it doesn't reproduce. Okay. And so when those hair cells are destroyed, then that's why that happened. And there's no replacement for that. Particularly in that particular pitch area of hearing, you see. And typically our high pitch tends to go away sooner than our low pitch sound.
I have a question.
Yes.
I know someone that lost their hearing going up in a plane. So what was the technical
Growing up
issue?
where now?
Going up in a plane?
Lost their hearing going up a single time?
Yes, a single time.
And when they came down, did it come back?
No, not at all. But I just wanted to know what they told them they had toxemia before they went up, and that was a result. But in your diagrams, I just wanted to know what would have been the actual loss. I guess you would have had to see.
Yeah, let's see if we can see the best slide to show that. This is probably the one that here. In terms of barometric pressure, there's air that's in the middle ear. Like if we're standing on the ground here, there's air in the middle ear, and we're opening and closing our mouth. That air pressure is the same air pressure as on the outside of our body, around our face. But if we go up in a plane or drive up a mountain, sometime this tube will collapse, and this air pressure will be larger, greater air pressure than the surrounding air that's outside of us. And so to equalize that, you'll get this pressure in your ear, and therefore you'll chew, swallow, or something like that to allow this tube to open up as you are going up the mountain to keep this pressure inside the same as outside around the ear. Now, unless there's some problem with the ear tube or swelling or something else, which would have to be looked at to evaluate that pressure, unless that pressure was so high, because I forget what the altitude pressure in the airplanes they pressurize that cabin to, but still without swallowing, it still would be uncomfortable throughout the flight if not having that equalized. But to go up a single time in a plane and have permanent hearing loss, that would be there's several things to be looked at as to what that is. What was the nature of the eardrum? How did it affect the mechanisms of the oval window, the ossicle? There's just too many questions to evaluate with a single event like that. but initially it's just because of not the dullness of hearing is the higher pressure here different than the pressure outside. Or if you're coming down from a high to a low point, the pressures have to equalize to allow this to function as it should.
I have another question for you, Doctor. If you pierce your eardrum or damage the eardrum, is that a permanent event or can it be
No.
restored?
Well, it depends how obviously depends how the piercing occurs, but there's oftentimes kids get middle ear infections, and they get so much pressure, they break the eardrum, but that does heal, that does re-heal. And then oftentimes doctors, to relieve pressure in the middle ear because they got a middle ear infection, they will put a little slit in the eardrum to allow that infection to drain out. But most oftentimes that ear will return back, will repair itself. That eardrum will repair itself.
Okay.
Dr. Ben, can you speak quickly on household appliances and hearing loss, general household appliances and hearing loss?
Say that again. What kind of appliances?
General household appliances and hearing loss. For instance, a blender, certain household appliances. What is the safe level for decibels or beyond that affects the hearing?
Now that I'd have to review what that decibel level is, but indeed but household appliances creating that type of level, if you're listening to something like a jackhammer or high pitched sounds like in a factory, not only the decibel but also the pitch that they have over a continuous time. Usually if you're in a factory, they will give you sound equipment to wear because it's known that the sound atmosphere is injurious, is constantly presenting to the ear, is injurious to the ear. But household appliances, I like to know what those particular things are that one is using that consistently, that's creating that level of decibels.
And sorry, one last question. Is there something as selective hearing? Like not conscientious, but where somebody might hear crickets and somebody may not hear crickets, or the creaking of a frog. Is there something that causes one to hear and one not to hear?
Well, surely there is, but I'm thinking when you say selective hearing, then that implies a choice.
Right, but let's say if it's without a choice, somebody might not hear crickets because they might be familiar with the sound of crickets. And someone going to vacation in an area where they've never heard crickets, they would hear crickets endlessly. But it seems like some sounds people hear and some sounds people do not hear. So I'm wondering if there could be something, whatever, mechanical or something going on there.
Now, that's interesting. I was looking up on the decibel issue. It said that if the noise is if the decibel level is 70 over a prolonged time, that can start damaging the ear.
Right.
So, and a whisper is about 30 decibels. Okay. So normal conversation about 60, a motorcycle engine about 95. So a constant over a period of time is about 70 decibels for causing hearing damage. If the decibel is like 120, then it can cause immediate injury to the ear. But in terms of, I don't have an answer to that selectivity in terms, what mechanism would be occurring with that, but maybe an ENT guy would be obviously more apt to provide the wide scope of that exposure.
Thank you.
DJ, is it?
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Ben. I have a question about removal of earwax, safe ways to remove earwax. And how do you feel about the ear candling? Have you heard of that?
The ear which?
Candling. You know how you put the ear candle cone like in your ear?
Oh, I'm not familiar with that. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
It's a natural thing.
But far as easy and safe way, one is understanding and know there's no particular infection or something, but periodically just allowing the shower to spray into your ear, not a real forceful stream, but you can get a sense that the water is getting deep into your ear, and you're moving it around probably for about 3 to 4 minutes every week or two or so. Then that will keep the earwax hydrated, and it will easily wash out. But once it becomes desiccated or hardened, then it is difficult to move in. Sometimes it requires manual movement to get it out. It requires that kind of movement, then a doctor, one who is skilled to do that, should do that so that there's not injury either to the canal or to the eardrum in taking that out.
Okay, also, what about the over-the-counter products?
Such as Cerumex, those, if you're following their directions, there shouldn't be any problem with that. They're just really hydrators to soften up the earwax so that it will easily come out with washing.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Dr. Ben?
Yes.
Yes, you may have covered this here. I'm sorry, I just got on a little while ago. I wanted to know, in regards to cleaning your ear, the wax out your ear, is it harmful, like I said, you may have covered, to use Q-tips? Because I understand that may push things in further, or we shouldn't use Q-tip. And I'm just hearing you, saying the water from the shower should be enough. So would you say we should not use like those Q-tips but not, of course, not to press it in too deep, but I was just wondering.
Yeah, the medical advice to the untrained, no, you shouldn't use the Q-tip in your ear because you're not really knowing what you're doing, is not under your direct vision what is happening. Really, the ear really should be evaluated, looked at if you have an ear otoscope, to look at and see what is in there. Water is probably warm water is probably the best initially to wash things out. Then under a trained eye, trained hands, then you may use a Q-tip, or they got other tools that we use in removing items out of the ear, from forceps to, obviously I removed a lot of things, bugs, moths, beads, etc. But you have to be trained to know what you're doing, what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Well, how often would you say, like, I don't know, as far as the wax buildup in your ear, is this something you should be doing every day when you shower? You should definitely let the water run through this like on a daily basis, or that's over too much, or what?
Probably not. This is part of our health talk in terms of looking at being well hydrated, drinking enough water, because the earwax has a portion of water in it. The better the hydration we are, the more liquidy it's going to be. Probably depends on your age group. If a person is an older individual, not drinking much water, tends to be more to the dehydrated side, then they may be should be cleaning out maybe every 2 weeks or so. A younger individual, well active, well hydrated, maybe once every 3 weeks or 4 weeks or so. So it depends on how they manage themselves, but hydrate, just water through a shower, or if you have these little soft, you have these little newborn babies have these little soft rubber bulbs that moms use to clean out their nose and ears, things like that, clean out their nose or suck out their mouth. Those little soft things are easy to wash. You can't get a lot of pressure with that, and they're easy to rinse out the ear canal.
Okay, so you're not talking like a syringe, like to suction it out, something like that?
No, not unless you're trained about that, because you can create some significant pressure against the eardrum and injure the middle ear and those mechanisms in there. So I would not use suction for sure, but usually just pressure, mild pressure, and syringes, you have to be careful with them as to what kind of pressure you're pushing in there, but that will easily run out. So I wouldn't use the suction. That would have to be definitely trained hand to know what they want to do with that. Usually we're going to be using very technical forceps to take things out that are not coming out easily. I've not ever used suction in my years of practice in the ear.
Okay. Yes, I did hear what the other sister was saying. It's a device, it's like wax, and you put it in your ear, and with the heat, it melts the wax in your ear. It's like it is a natural, I think it's for irrigation or something like that. And you put it in your ear, and it with some heat, and then it just melts. But you haven't heard of that, doing that. I haven't had it done, but I heard it.
I'm casually aware of it, but I would caution you just have to identify an evaluation of that ear first before surely you put any heat in there, and then what that temperature is that you don't injure, make it worse. First do no harm is the wisdom.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. Thank you, Dr. Scott, for your time, for the wealth of knowledge that you've offered. It's been a blessing. Do you have any closing statements for us?
He that hath an ear, let him hear.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. This is Dr. Ben Scott. He, every week or every other week, he comes on and brings anatomy and physiology discussions. Here, let me go ahead and mute my video here. All right.